My golden brother impregnated my unfaithful wife while my family was aware of it, but said nothing, so I settled all my affairs and left her. Then my grandfather seriously punished everyone responsible. Subreddit, I never imagined I'd be typing out my personal life for strangers on the internet. But here I am at 2:30 a.m., unable to sleep and needing to get this off my chest. This situation has been suffocating me for way too long, and I thought I had everything figured out until life decided to slap me across the face with the most devastating betrayal imaginable. Fair warning, I'm not much of a writer, so please bear with me if I stumble through some of these words. I'm 28 years old, male, and I work as a project manager at my father's HVAC installation company here in Las Vegas. Yeah, I know exactly what you're thinking right now. Classic nepotism baby who got handed everything on a silver platter. But hold up before you make that judgment, because I earned every single promotion through blood, sweat, and years of proving myself from the ground up. My journey with this company started when I was just 14 years old, cleaning air conditioning units and organizing equipment like some kind of cooling system grunt. I wasn't given any special treatment or easy assignments because of my last name. Instead, I worked my way up through every single aspect of the business over the course of more than a decade. I learned electrical work, spent countless hours on rooftop installations in the brutal Nevada heat, mastered compressor systems, and eventually moved into ductwork design. If it involves making buildings comfortable, I've done it with my own two hands. By the time I reached 22, my father promoted me to project manager, not because I shared his DNA, but because I could actually deliver results. I had proven that I could coordinate installation crews effectively, manage complex project timelines, and deal with the bureaucratic nightmare of city permitting without everything falling apart. The money is decent too, pulling in good cash annually plus performance bonuses that reflect the quality of my work. I bought my house 2 years before I got married, and I'm proud to say I have no debt except for the mortgage. Everything I own, I worked for and earned through my own efforts. Then there's my ex-wife Victoria, who's 27 years old and works as a nurse making decent money in her own right. I met her at this dive bar near the hospital when she was about to graduate from nursing school. She seemed like she had her life together. Attractive, focused, career-driven, and ambitious. At the time, I genuinely thought I'd hit the jackpot with her. Now let me tell you about my family, because understanding their dynamics is absolutely crucial to comprehending this entire mess. My dad, Robert, is 54 years old and built his company from absolutely nothing through pure determination and grinding work ethic. He spent his 20s and 30s working his ass off, and by the time he was 38, he was signing commercial contracts for shopping centers and office buildings. Now, we have teams working on multi-million-dollar HVAC installations across the Las Vegas metropolitan area. Dad represents old-school values in the best way possible. He believes that respect is something you earn through sweat, dedication, and consistent results, not something that gets handed out like participation trophies to people who simply show up. Everything he's achieved in his life came through pure effort and refusing to accept excuses or laziness from himself or anyone around him. My mom, Linda, is 52 years old and retired from working in the school district. These days, she spends her time shopping with my dad's money and gossiping with her church friends about everyone else's business. She acts like she's Mother Teresa reincarnated, always putting on this saintly facade for the community. But behind closed doors, she'll badmouth everyone behind their backs faster than you can say, "Bless your heart." The hypocrisy was always there, but I never realized just how deep it ran until everything came crashing down. And then there's my brother Kevin, who's 24 years old. Oh boy, where do I even begin with this guy? He's basically the definition of everything that's wrong with entitled people from my generation. Kevin has never had a real job in his entire life. He just waltzed into Dad's office doing basic administrative tasks like scheduling and inventory management for decent pay that he absolutely didn't deserve. Dad kept hoping that Kevin would eventually mature and start taking on more responsibilities, but Kevin consistently acted like he was doing the entire family a favor just by showing up to work. Let me give you some context about how differently our father tried to raise us. Remember how I mentioned that Dad tried to turn me into a man by having me work installation jobs during summers? Well, he attempted the exact same approach with Kevin, except the results were completely different. Dad put Kevin on rooftop installation crews, starting when he was 15 years old, hoping that some good old-fashioned hard work would straighten him out and teach him the value of earning his keep. But instead of rising to the challenge like I did, Kevin would show up late to job sites, complain about absolutely everything, and spend most of his time hiding in the air-conditioned company truck while everyone else busted their asses installing units in 110-degree Nevada heat. I'll never forget this one incident when Kevin was 18 years old and they assigned him to a commercial rooftop installation project in the middle of August. He lasted exactly 90 minutes before claiming he was getting heat stroke and needed to go home immediately. Meanwhile, the rest of us finished a full 12-hour workday without any complaints. Dad was so embarrassed when the installation crew started making jokes about his delicate son that he could barely look Kevin in the eye for weeks afterward. While I was learning every single aspect of HVAC installation and proving myself worthy of increased responsibility, Kevin was upstairs playing video games and spending money he hadn't earned. When I bought my house, he made sarcastic comments about how lucky some people are. When Dad promoted me to project manager, Kevin claimed it was pure favoritism, completely ignoring the decade of hard work and dedication I had put into earning that position. 2 years ago, Kevin managed to get himself into serious financial trouble through his own poor decisions. He had maxed out multiple credit cards and taken on car payments he couldn't afford. Typical living beyond your means behavior that showed his complete lack of financial responsibility. Dad, being the generous father he was, lent Kevin $18,000 with a reasonable 2-year payback plan that would have been easy to manage with consistent effort. Kevin made exactly 3 payments before the excuses started flowing like water. By the time our story really begins, Kevin was driving a leased Audi that cost more than most people's monthly rent, wearing designer clothes, and acting like some kind of executive when he was basically doing glorified data entry work. Mom would praise him enthusiastically for showing up to work 4 days in a row, while I was successfully closing a $750,000 commercial HVAC installation that required months of planning and coordination. Looking back now, I can see that all the warning signs were clearly there, flashing like neon lights in front of my face. But when you're grinding 65-hour weeks trying to build something meaningful and secure your financial future, you don't always notice the snakes slithering around in your own backyard, plotting your downfall. February 2024 started with what should have been the absolute highlight of my career. Dad managed to land the biggest contract in our company's history, a complete HVAC installation for a brand new downtown Las Vegas medical complex worth an incredible $5.8 million. This was the kind of project that could set our entire family up for life and open doors to even bigger opportunities in the commercial sector. Dad assigned the project directly to me, which was both an honor and an enormous responsibility. The demands of this contract were absolutely brutal, though. We were dealing with strict medical facility regulations that left zero room for error, daily inspections from multiple regulatory agencies, and absolutely no tolerance for delays of any kind. I'm talking about installing complex HVAC systems in an active hospital environment where one single electrical mistake could literally endanger patients' lives. The pressure was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my career. I practically moved into that job site for the duration of the project. I was working a minimum of 10 hours every single day, including weekends, and sometimes I'd be there from 5:30 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night. The technical challenges were incredibly intense because medical facilities require redundant climate control systems for patient safety. We were installing both primary rooftop units and ground-mounted backup systems that had to integrate seamlessly with the hospital's existing infrastructure. Every single compressor had to meet hospital-grade specifications, which are far more stringent than standard commercial installations. The air filtration systems needed perfect integration with the facility's emergency power systems, and every component had to be precisely calibrated for the specific needs of different medical departments. It was precision engineering at its finest, with people's lives literally depending on us getting every detail exactly right. Victoria was understanding and supportive at first, which I really appreciated during such a stressful time. She'd even bring me dinner sometimes, showing up at the job site in her scrubs with takeout from whatever restaurant was still open late. She knew that this contract could fundamentally change our future together. We were planning to use my performance bonus to pay off our house completely and start looking seriously at investment properties that could provide us with long-term financial security. But then, slowly and almost imperceptibly, while I was completely buried in electrical diagrams and installation schedules, Victoria started going out with this traveling nurse named Jessica. According to Victoria, Jessica was single, fun-loving, and knew all the coolest spots around Las Vegas. Suddenly, my wife was hitting the town 4 times a week instead of our usual Netflix and chill routine that we'd established during our marriage. I should have paid much closer attention to this dramatic change in her behavior, but I was completely consumed by the technical demands of the project. At the time, it just seemed like she was making the best of a difficult situation where her husband was basically married to his job. I thought she was being mature and independent by finding ways to entertain herself while I worked these insane hours. The first real sign that something was seriously wrong came in March. Victoria had always worked a very predictable schedule that we had built our entire married life around. 3 12-hour shifts per week, usually on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. It was a routine that allowed us to plan our time together, and I knew exactly when she'd be home and when we'd have opportunities to spend quality time together. But suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, she was covering extra shifts constantly. There were mandatory training sessions that supposedly appeared without any advance notice, emergency situations at the hospital that required her specific expertise, and overtime opportunities that she claimed were too financially beneficial to pass up. Her base schedule stayed exactly the same on paper, but in reality, she was actually working 5 or 6 days a week instead of her normal 3. Around the same exact time, Kevin started showing up at our house when I wasn't there. I'd drag myself home completely exhausted at 7:30 in the evening, and Victoria would casually mention that Kevin had stopped by during the day. He'd brought her coffee from some fancy downtown place, or helped fix something around the house that I hadn't had time to deal with because of my work schedule. At first, I actually thought this was a positive development. Kevin was finally acting like a responsible member of the family instead of the lazy, entitled person he'd always been. Even at work, he seemed more professional than usual, dressing better, showing up on time consistently, and actually volunteering for weekend tasks without being forced. Dad mentioned this improvement several times, saying that maybe Kevin was finally growing up and taking his responsibilities seriously. I was completely wrong about that assessment. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, the fight started happening with increasing frequency and intensity. Victoria began complaining constantly about me working too much, even though we had both agreed that this contract was temporary but financially transformative for our future. One particular night stands out in my memory. I came home around 8:30 p.m. after a particularly brutal day dealing with complex electrical installations, and all I wanted was to grab some food, maybe watch TV for an hour to decompress, and then crash into bed. Instead, Victoria was waiting for me with this hostile attitude that I could literally feel radiating from across the room before I even got my work boots off. "So this is what our marriage is now," she started, before I could even properly get through the door. "You come home, eat whatever I've kept warm for you, and then pass out like a zombie. When was the last time we actually talked, Tyler? I mean, really talked, not just you grunting responses while you're half asleep." I tried explaining to her that this demanding schedule was temporary, and that we had already agreed together that it would set us up financially for years to come. But she wasn't hearing any of it and seemed determined to pick a fight. "I didn't sign up to be a single woman while married," she snapped with obvious anger. "Other husbands make time for their wives. Other husbands don't treat their homes like hotels where they just show up to sleep and eat. Victoria, this is a $5.8 million contract we're talking about here. This is our future, our financial security." "Our future? What about our present?" she shot back immediately. "I'm 27 years old, Tyler. I shouldn't have to beg my husband for attention like I'm some kind of desperate housewife." "You're not begging for anything," I replied, trying to stay calm and rational. "You knew exactly what this project meant when it started. I knew it would be demanding, but I didn't know you'd become a complete stranger who cares more about air conditioning units than his own wife." She kept arguing relentlessly, acting like I was deliberately neglecting her instead of working my ass off to secure our financial future together. The problem was, I genuinely thought I was trying my best under the circumstances. I'd make efforts to grab lunch for her from her favorite restaurant sometimes, and I always tried to make time for her on weekends when the project demands were lighter. But apparently, nothing I did was enough to satisfy her growing resentment. By April 2024, we had successfully finished the HVAC installation ahead of schedule and under budget, which was a massive professional success. We saved $45,000 in costs through efficient project management and earned a substantial reputation bonus that Dad was already planning to reinvest in new equipment for future projects. I thought that life would finally go back to normal once I wasn't spending every waking hour at the job site, and we could rebuild the intimacy in our marriage. But normal had been completely redefined while I wasn't paying attention, and I was about to discover just how dramatically things had changed. Even though my workload decreased dramatically after the project completion, Victoria's chaotic schedule stayed exactly the same. She was still working all those extra shifts, attending all those mandatory training sessions, and dealing with all those emergency situations that supposedly required her specific expertise. May hit me like a freight train carrying a full cargo of reality checks. With the major project finally wrapped up, I suddenly had time to pay attention to my actual life instead of just work responsibilities. What I discovered was like finding out that your favorite restaurant has been serving you cardboard while you were too busy and distracted to actually taste the food. The first major red flag that I couldn't ignore was Victoria's morning routine, which had changed completely. She'd wake up at 5:30 a.m. every single day and immediately run to the bathroom to throw up violently. I'm talking about full-on hunched over the toilet, looking like absolute death, retching sounds that echoed through the entire house. Then she'd take these incredibly long showers that lasted way longer than her normal routine. One morning, I got up early to check on her because I was genuinely concerned about her health. I found her pale as a ghost, gripping the toilet seat with white knuckles while dry heaving. The most obvious explanation hit me immediately. She had to be pregnant. We'd been actively trying to conceive since November 2023, so the timing would have made perfect sense with our family planning goals. But when I brought up this possibility, her reaction was pure panic. Not excitement, not happiness, not even nervous anticipation like you'd expect from someone who'd been trying to get pregnant. Just straight up fear and denial. She completely denied the possibility, claiming instead that it was some kind of virus that was affecting several nurses at the hospital. This explanation made absolutely no sense, especially since we had stopped using birth control back in November, specifically because we wanted to start a family. Victoria had been tracking her menstrual cycle obsessively on some smartphone app, and we'd been discussing ovulation timing and optimal conception days without any weirdness or reluctance on her part. She was already 3 weeks late, but when I mentioned this obvious fact, she went completely defensive and hostile. "Why are you tracking my period like some kind of creep?" she demanded angrily. "I can manage my own body, Tyler." That wasn't normal behavior between two married people who were actively trying to become parents together. Around the same time that Victoria's morning routine became so concerning, my mom started acting completely bizarre in ways that made no sense given our family's normal communication patterns. Instead of calling our landline like she usually did for family check-ins, she was calling Victoria's cell phone directly. These weren't quick 5-minute conversations either. They were long, whispered discussions that happened when Victoria was alone in the garden or locked away in our bedroom where she thought I couldn't overhear. When I managed to get close enough to listen, I'd catch fragments of conversation like, "You have to be careful with that," or "Make sure everything is controlled." The conversations would end abruptly the moment I got too close, or if Victoria noticed me trying to listen. This behavior was especially weird because Mom and Victoria had barely tolerated each other for the entire 3 years of our marriage. They were polite when necessary, but they'd never been close friends who had regular heart-to-heart conversations. Suddenly, they were having these secret phone sessions that lasted over half an hour, multiple times per week. Something was definitely going on between them, and I was being deliberately excluded from whatever they were discussing. I also started paying much closer attention to Victoria's work stories, and they stopped making logical sense when I analyzed them carefully. She'd claimed to have covered a brutal double shift that should have left her exhausted, but she'd come home with tons of energy like she'd been out having fun instead of working in a high-stress hospital environment. She'd talk about assisting in complex surgeries that should have been mentally and physically draining, but her scrubs didn't smell like disinfectant or have any traces of blood, which were always present after she'd actually been working in an operating room. The money situation was getting increasingly strange too. I discovered that Victoria had been withdrawing exactly $180 in cash every Thursday for over 2 months. When I asked her about this consistent pattern, she claimed that going out with friends had gotten more expensive lately, and she preferred paying cash to avoid overspending on credit cards. This explanation seemed reasonable on the surface, but $180 every single week added up to over $1,400 per month, which was a substantial amount for someone who claimed to be budget conscious. Then there was her phone behavior, which became increasingly secretive and suspicious. Victoria was constantly texting throughout the day, smiling at her screen in this secretive, almost giddy way that suggested she was having engaging conversations with someone. She'd become completely absorbed in whatever messages she was receiving and sending. But the second I walked into the room, she'd immediately flip the phone face down or slide it into her pocket like she was hiding something important. The final straw that forced me to confront reality came on a Wednesday in mid-May. My work truck wouldn't start that morning, so I had to come home early around 1:30 p.m. with Rodriguez, one of my installation team leads who had given me a ride back to the house. As I walked through the front door, I heard genuine laughter coming from the living room. Victoria was laughing in a way that I hadn't heard in months, with real joy and enthusiasm in her voice. When I walked into the living room, I saw her sitting on our couch with Kevin. They were sitting way too close for normal brother-in-law and sister-in-law interaction, almost intimately close. The second they saw me standing there, they separated like I'd caught them stealing something valuable. Victoria looked genuinely surprised and confused by my presence. "What are you doing here?" she asked, as if I didn't have every right to be in my own house. Meanwhile, Kevin spilled his iced coffee all over himself and started stammering some ridiculous excuse about being in the area and wanting to check on Victoria since I worked so many long hours. "I just wanted to make sure she was okay," Kevin said with this forced, nervous smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've been so busy lately with work, I thought I could keep her company." Victoria couldn't look me directly in the eye and seemed flustered by the unexpected interruption. "Kevin brought me coffee from downtown," she said, trying to sound casual. "That's nice of him, right?" Everything about the entire situation felt fundamentally wrong. The way they were sitting together, the way they reacted to my arrival, the nervous energy in the room, it all pointed to something inappropriate happening in my own home while I was working to support our family. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Every suspicious thing from the past few months kept running through my head in an endless loop. I started mentally cataloging all the times Kevin had stopped by when I wasn't home, all the extra shifts Victoria was supposedly working, all the unexplained cash withdrawals, and all the secretive phone conversations with my mother. When you lay out all these individual incidents together, like pieces of a puzzle, the pattern becomes pretty damn obvious. Something was definitely, seriously wrong, and I was completely done turning a blind eye to the mounting evidence. The next morning, I decided it was time to channel my inner detective and figure out what the hell was actually going on in my life. I was tired of being in the dark and making excuses for increasingly suspicious behavior. If something was happening behind my back, I needed concrete evidence before confronting anyone about it. My first stop was our company records, because Kevin had access to job sites and vehicles through our fleet management system. As a project manager, I had administrative access to GPS tracking logs for all company vehicles, which we used for efficiency monitoring and route optimization. I pulled up the GPS logs for Kevin's assigned work truck over the past 3 months, and cross-referenced them with the locations and times of our actual HVAC installation projects. What I discovered was absolutely mind-blowing and confirmed my worst suspicions. This guy had been making dozens of stops at places that had absolutely nothing to do with our legitimate HVAC installations or any work-related business. The GPS showed multiple visits to my neighborhood during standard work hours when he should have been at job sites. There were trips to a hotel in Henderson that definitely wasn't on any of our project lists or client locations. I found restaurant visits in areas where we had 0 active jobs or any reason for a company vehicle to be present. Then I compared those suspicious dates and times with the shared digital calendar that Victoria and I used for coordinating our schedules and planning our time together. The correlation was absolutely perfect and damning. Every single time Kevin's work truck showed up near one of those suspicious locations, Victoria had claimed to be covering an extra shift at the hospital or handling some emergency situation that required her immediate attention. Next, I went deeper into our personal bank account history to look for additional patterns. Those $180 Thursday cash withdrawals weren't random spending. They were like clockwork for over 2 months, suggesting a planned, recurring expense. But I also found credit card charges at restaurants and hotels in Henderson on specific days when Victoria had claimed to be working mandatory overtime shifts at the hospital. I started keeping detailed written records of every single discrepancy between her claimed schedule and our actual spending patterns. When you organize all this information on paper and look at it objectively, the pattern was so obvious that a blind person could see what was happening. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Now it was time for the ultimate test to confirm my suspicions. I called the hospital directly, pretending to have a family emergency and needing to reach Victoria immediately for urgent personal matters. The nurse who answered the phone told me that Victoria wasn't on shift that day and hadn't been scheduled to work the day before either. According to Victoria's own statements to me, she had worked a grueling 12-hour shift the previous night and had another 12-hour shift scheduled for that day. But according to the hospital's actual records, she wasn't even supposed to be there during either of those time periods. She had been lying to me consistently about her work schedule. Then I decided to check her email account. We had shared all our passwords since our second wedding anniversary as this sweet, romantic gesture of trust and transparency in our marriage. It was supposed to represent how we had no secrets from each other and were completely open about our lives. Friday morning, I told Victoria that I was staying home with a stomach bug and wouldn't be going to work. Once she left for what she claimed was a mandatory training session at the hospital, I sat down at our shared computer in the home office. I logged into her email account using the password we'd agreed to share as a symbol of our mutual trust. Right at the top of her inbox was an email thread between Victoria and my mom that made my blood run cold. The subject line read, "Make sure Tyler doesn't find out," in plain text. I literally felt my stomach drop into my shoes as the full implications of that subject line hit me. I opened the email thread with trembling hands and found 3 full months of detailed correspondence between my wife and my mother. They had been planning and coordinating every aspect of Victoria's relationship with Kevin behind my back. The early March emails were somewhat cautious, with Mom asking if Victoria was absolutely sure about what she was doing and warning her that it might just be a temporary phase that could blow over. But as the weeks progressed, the messages became increasingly detailed and calculated. My own mother was giving Victoria step-by-step instructions on how to lie to me effectively. She was advising her on when to claim extra shifts, what excuses would sound most believable to someone with my personality, and how to cover her tracks to avoid getting caught. Mom had even offered her house as a meeting place for Victoria and Kevin when Dad was playing golf or working late at the office. One email from April made me want to punch a hole straight through the computer screen. "Robert plays golf every Friday until 5:30 p.m., so you'll have at least 4 hours of privacy. Kevin can come in through the side garage entrance, and I'll make sure the neighbors don't notice anything suspicious." Another message said, "Tell Tyler you have a double shift on Wednesday. Robert has contractor meetings until 9 p.m., so the house will be completely empty. Kevin already told his roommate he's staying at a job site overnight, so everything is covered." Then came the emails about the pregnancy that made me feel physically sick to my stomach. In mid-May, Victoria had confirmed to my mother that she was 7 weeks pregnant. The most devastating part was that they couldn't determine whether the baby was mine or Kevin's because the timing overlapped with both of us during her fertile periods. My mother's response was absolutely sickening and showed a level of calculated cruelty I never thought she was capable of. Make him believe the baby is his. He'll be a better father than Kevin anyway, and what he doesn't know won't hurt him. When Victoria asked what would happen if I found out later, especially if the baby ended up looking like Kevin, Mom replied, "We'll handle that situation if it happens. For now, just focus on making everything look normal and keeping Tyler from getting suspicious." I spent over 2 hours reading every single email in that thread, taking screenshots of the most damaging messages, saving the most incriminating evidence to a USB drive, and printing hard copies of everything that could be used as proof. They had been planning to destroy my life for months, thinking they were clever enough to manipulate me indefinitely. They thought I was too busy and distracted with work to figure out what was happening right under my nose. They were dead wrong about that assumption. After finishing my investigation of the emails, I called Dad immediately. My voice was probably shaking with rage when I spoke. "I need to see you at the office right now," I told him. "This is urgent, and I absolutely cannot discuss it over the phone." 20 minutes later, we were sitting face to face in his private office. I told him everything I had discovered. The GPS logs, the bank statements, the hospital verification, and most importantly, the email correspondence between Victoria and Mom. He listened in complete silence, his expression getting darker and more furious with each detail I revealed. When I finally finished explaining the full scope of the betrayal, he spoke in a voice that was scary calm, like the quiet before a devastating storm. "Meet me at Thompson's office in 2 hours, he said with controlled anger. "Don't talk to anyone about this until we have a proper legal plan in place." Thompson was our company's attorney, and Dad had already called ahead to clear his entire afternoon schedule for us. Thompson analyzed everything methodically: the emails, bank statements, GPS records, receipts, and hospital schedule discrepancies. His professional verdict was straightforward and reassuring. With this level of documentation and evidence, we could move quickly to protect everything I had built and worked for. His legal instructions were clear and decisive. Secure all finances immediately, safeguard all assets, document absolutely everything, and most importantly, don't confront anyone until we had a bulletproof legal framework in place. My first stop was the bank, where I moved quickly to protect my financial interests. I transferred $88,000 from our joint checking account to my personal account, leaving exactly $4,500 so it wouldn't look suspicious if Victoria happened to check the balance online. I also verified that my premarital investments, approximately $125,000 in retirement accounts and stock portfolios, were properly registered as separate property with no possibility of Victoria claiming them in divorce proceedings. While I was protecting my assets, Dad followed through on his own promises. He immediately canceled Kevin's access to all company accounts and vehicles, effective immediately. He instructed Linda, our office manager, that Kevin was being permanently reassigned and would no longer need his company truck, corporate credit card, or building access privileges. Kevin would discover all of these changes on Monday morning when his keycard wouldn't work and his truck wouldn't start. There would be no advance warning and no opportunity for him to prepare or make excuses. I also took the precaution of blocking all joint credit cards except for one with a strictly limited $1,800 spending limit. And I removed Victoria as an authorized user on all my personal credit cards. This would prevent any potential retaliation spending sprees or attempts to drain our accounts out of spite. Every single decision I made was cold, calculated, and completely legal under Nevada law. That night, while Victoria was taking her usual long shower, a text message came through on her phone from Kevin. The message said, "Can't wait for tomorrow at Mom's. Dad's working late, so we'll have the place to ourselves." Perfect timing. I immediately took a screenshot of this message and sent it directly to Thompson as additional evidence that the affair was not only ongoing, but actually escalating. This was just one more piece of proof that they were actively planning to continue their betrayal. That's when I decided it was time to go completely nuclear and end this charade once and for all. I called Dad and asked him to organize a mandatory family dinner at my house for Sunday night. I didn't need to explain my reasoning in detail. Robert knew exactly what was coming and what I was planning to do. He called both Mom and Kevin separately, telling them that it was a mandatory family dinner because I had a big announcement to share with everyone. He made it clear that attendance wasn't optional. Saturday morning, I told Victoria about the family dinner I was organizing. I watched her entire body tense up immediately when I mentioned it. She started firing nervous questions at me rapid fire. What kind of announcement was I planning to make? Why was I organizing a family dinner when I usually tried to avoid them? Should she prepare anything special for the meal? I told her calmly that I wanted to gather everyone together to share some important good news. Her face went visibly pale when I said this. "What kind of news?" she asked nervously. "You're making me really nervous, Tyler." "You'll find out everything on Sunday," I replied, keeping my expression completely neutral. Sunday, May 12th, I prepared our dining room like a battlefield. I placed the divorce papers in a manila envelope at my place setting, and I prepared another envelope with printed copies of the most incriminating emails for Dad to read aloud to everyone present. Mom arrived first and immediately started asking pointed questions about Victoria and the mysterious big announcement I was planning to make. Dad just looked at me knowingly, without saying a single word. He understood exactly what was about to happen. Kevin showed up 15 minutes late, as usual, and gave me that patronizing shoulder pat that he always used when he was trying to act like the superior brother. During dinner, Victoria barely touched her food at all. She just pushed it around on her plate while shooting nervous glances back and forth between Kevin and me, clearly sensing that something major was about to happen. Mom tried desperately to maintain surface-level conversation about the weather and church gossip, but the tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Everyone could feel that something big was coming, but only Dad and I knew exactly what it would be. When we finished eating, Dad raised his beer in what looked like a toast gesture. "Well, son," he said with a slight smile, "what's this big news you wanted to share with the family?" "Right," I said calmly. "About that." I pulled out the manila envelope and slid it directly towards Victoria across the dining room table. "These are divorce papers," I announced in the calmest voice I could manage. Dead silence filled the entire room. The only sounds were the air conditioner humming in the background and some dog barking in the distance. Victoria went white as paper, her hands visibly shaking as she stared at the envelope like it contained a bomb. What are you saying, Tyler?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Mom immediately went into full dramatic mode, her voice rising to near hysteria levels. "Tyler, what are you doing? Are you completely insane? You can't just spring something like this on us." "Enough, Mom," I interrupted firmly, handing Dad the second envelope. "These are 3 months of emails between you and Victoria covering every detail of her affair with Kevin." Dad started reading the printed emails even though he already knew about their contents. But reading Victoria's exact words out loud in front of everyone hit completely different than just knowing about them abstractly. The impact was devastating. Kevin jumped up from his chair so quickly that he knocked it over, the wooden chair clattering loudly on the hardwood floor. You went through her emails? That's completely illegal, Tyler. Is that seriously what you're worried about right now? I replied in the calmest voice possible, my anger so controlled it was almost scary. Not that you've been screwing my wife for months behind my back? Victoria covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Tyler, please just listen to me for a minute. Let me explain what really happened. Shut up, Victoria, I said, without even looking in her direction. Dad, read the part where Mom suggests using your golf schedule so they could meet at the house. Mom lunged across the table, trying desperately to grab the papers from Dad's hands, but he held her back with one strong arm while continuing to read. Linda, what the hell is this? He roared with a fury that literally shook the entire house. What the fuck is this bullshit? Robert, I can explain everything, Mom said, her voice cracking with panic. This isn't what it looks like. Explain what exactly? Dad shouted back. How you destroyed this family. How you turned one son against the other. How you've been lying directly to my face for months while helping them betray Tyler. Mom's saint act finally cracked completely under the pressure. She pointed an accusatory finger directly at Victoria. She came to me first. She seduced Kevin. I was just trying to prevent a complete family catastrophe. Kevin, displaying the shamelessness that had defined his entire character, just shrugged with complete indifference. Everyone needs to calm down and think rationally about this. Tyler works 65 hours a week. Victoria needed attention and emotional support. I was there when he wasn't. That's when I completely lost control of my temper. I stood up, walked calmly around the table, and punched him with absolutely everything I had. I felt his nose break instantly under my fist. Blood splattered all over his expensive shirt as he hit the floor hard, taking a side table down with him and sending a lamp crashing to the ground. Mom screamed like someone was actively murdering her precious baby boy. Tyler, stop! You're going to kill him! Dad stood up like a mountain rising from the earth, his presence filling the entire room. Get him out of this house right now, he commanded with absolute authority. Kevin was lying on my hardwood floor, blood pouring from his broken nose and staining my floor. Dad, you can't do this to me, he whined pathetically. I'm your son too. You're fired, Dad said with ice-cold finality. All funding is cut off. You're dead to me. Robert, he's your son! Mom screamed through her tears, trying to help Kevin up from the floor. Tyler is my son, Dad replied with devastating clarity. Kevin proved today that blood means absolutely nothing when you betray your own family. Victoria was sobbing so uncontrollably that she could barely speak. Tyler, the baby could be yours. Please don't do this to us. We can work through this. Then we'll do a paternity test, I said with complete finality. Either way, this marriage is over. You and I are done. Dad looked down at Kevin, who was still bleeding on my floor, then at Mom, who was desperately trying to help him up. His expression was absolutely ice cold. Kevin, you owe me $18,000, he said with quiet menace. You have exactly 30 days to pay it back in full, or I'm taking you to court. The free ride is completely over. Linda, get your coat, he continued, addressing Mom. We're leaving right now. You and I have some very serious things to discuss. When they finally left, Victoria and I stood in complete silence, surrounded by the wreckage of what used to be our family. Broken furniture, bloodstains on the floor, and the remnants of relationships that would never be repaired. What happens now? She asked quietly, her voice barely audible. Pack whatever you can carry and get out of my house, I replied, without any emotion in my voice. You have until tomorrow morning to figure out where the hell you're going to live. Tyler, please. Enough! I shouted, my composure finally cracking. I don't want to hear another word from you! She nodded silently and went upstairs to gather her belongings. For the first time in months, I was alone in my dining room, feeling something I hadn't experienced in forever. Genuine peace. The divorce process moved incredibly fast thanks to all the comprehensive evidence I had meticulously gathered, plus the prenuptial agreement we had signed before our marriage. Victoria's lawyer basically showed up to this legal fight armed with a pool noodle, while we brought a flamethrower loaded with documentation and ironclad contracts. The prenuptial agreement was absolutely bulletproof and covered every possible scenario. Everything I had acquired before our marriage stayed completely mine. The house, all my investments, my business interests, and every asset I had worked years to build. The prenup had been drafted by an excellent attorney and left no room for interpretation or legal challenges. Victoria tried desperately to ask for spousal support, claiming that she had sacrificed career opportunities to support my work schedule and deserved financial compensation. But Thompson shut that request down immediately with ruthless efficiency. Nevada might be a no-fault divorce state, but infidelity still matters significantly when it comes to property division and financial support calculations. Plus, she had a stable nursing income that provided her with financial independence, and the prenup specifically limited any support claims to very narrow circumstances that didn't apply to our situation. In the end, she walked away from our marriage with her personal belongings, her car, and exactly nothing else of value. The house stayed completely mine. All my premarital investments remained completely untouched and protected. She got to keep the consequences of her choices, which seemed like a perfectly fair trade considering the circumstances. The paternity test confirmed exactly what I already knew in my heart. The baby wasn't mine. The timing, the secrecy, the panic when I suggested pregnancy, all of it made perfect sense once the scientific results came back. I felt relief more than anything else, knowing that I wouldn't be tied to Victoria through a child for the next 18 years. Victoria moved in temporarily with Jessica, that traveling nurse who had been helping cover her fake shifts and providing alibis for her affair. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances who still worked at the hospital, Jessica got tired of the drama incredibly quickly. Apparently, Victoria was absolutely unbearable to live with, crying constantly, demanding attention and emotional support 24/7, and expecting her friend to cover all the household expenses while she dealt with being a pregnant single woman with no financial support. According to the gossip I heard, Victoria would spend entire days on the couch crying about how unfairly she had been treated, how I was heartless for not forgiving her, and how everyone had abandoned her in her time of need. She expected Jessica to play therapist, financial supporter, and caretaker all at the same time. 6 weeks later, Jessica finally reached her breaking point and kicked Victoria out of her apartment, telling her to find somewhere else to live and deal with her problems independently. Meanwhile, Dad followed through on absolutely every threat he had made during that explosive dinner. Kevin was permanently fired from the company and banned from any company property. But Dad didn't stop there with his punishment. He contacted other HVAC installation companies throughout the Las Vegas area and made sure they knew exactly why Kevin had been terminated. In this industry, word travels fast between companies, and Dad's reputation carried enough weight that Kevin found himself essentially blacklisted from legitimate HVAC work throughout the entire region. Dad also completely cut off all financial support that Kevin had been receiving. No more Audi lease payments, no corporate credit cards, no emergency cash bailouts, and no family financial safety net. Kevin was suddenly forced to survive on his own merit for the first time in his adult life. And that $18,000 debt that Dad had mentioned? He wasn't letting that slide or offering any payment plans. He gave Kevin exactly 30 days to pay it back in full, with no exceptions or extensions. When Kevin tried to negotiate for more time or smaller monthly payments, Dad's response was brutally simple. Pay up in full or I'm taking you to court. Your choice entirely. Victoria kept trying desperately to contact me through every possible channel. I blocked her on all social media platforms, changed my phone number, and had building security escort her off company property when she tried the ambush approach of showing up unannounced at my workplace. The final straw was receiving this incredibly long email, where she had the audacity to blame me entirely for her betrayal. According to her twisted logic, it was completely my fault for being too focused on work and not meeting her emotional needs adequately. She claimed that if I had been a more attentive husband, she never would have been vulnerable to Kevin's advances. She actually tried to paint herself as the victim in this entire situation, as if I had somehow forced her to have an affair by working hard to secure our financial future. 6 weeks after that dinner from hell, Dad filed for divorce from Mom at 54 years old. He was completely done supporting a dishonest wife who had actively worked to destroy our family. Mom completely lost her mind when she realized that he wasn't going to forgive and forget like she apparently expected. The divorce process was absolutely brutal for Mom, with Dad offering zero concessions or mercy. Dad kept the business, the house, and the vast majority of their shared assets. Mom, after 14 years of not working and living off Dad's success, suddenly had to take a job at a department store making $11 an hour. She found herself dealing with customers who treated her exactly the way she used to treat service workers when she thought she was better than them. Justice has a sense of humor sometimes. Kevin, with nowhere else to go and no financial resources, moved in with Mom into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the sketchy side of town. He tried coming back to Dad several times over the following months, apologizing profusely and begging for his old job back, claiming that he had learned his lesson and would never betray the family again. Dad's response never changed, no matter how many times Kevin showed up. "You chose to betray your own blood. Now live with what you deserve." It's been 18 months since everything went down, and I have to say that karma has been working absolute overtime to deliver justice to everyone involved. The transformation in my life has been remarkable, while the people who betrayed me have faced consequences that are almost poetic in their appropriateness. Dad and I are closer than we've ever been in our entire relationship. The shared experience of dealing with this betrayal brought us together in a way that years of normal family life never could. He made me a full partner in the company with a 35% ownership stake, recognizing not only my years of hard work, but also my loyalty during the family crisis. We've successfully expanded our operations into commercial developments in Reno and Henderson, and business is absolutely booming beyond our wildest expectations. But here's where things get really interesting and where karma starts showing its sense of dark humor. About 7 months ago, I heard through industry contacts that Kevin had gotten himself into serious legal trouble that made his previous financial problems look like child's play. It turns out that after burning through every legitimate job opportunity in Las Vegas due to his reputation and Dad's influence in the industry, Kevin had started taking out personal loans using completely fake employment information. He was running a sophisticated fraud scheme, taking out multiple loans from different financial companies, all based on elaborate lies about his income and employment status. The guy was actually pulling in maybe $13 an hour at various temporary employment agencies and part-time jobs. But he was claiming to loan companies that he made $55,000 annually working at HVAC companies that had actually blacklisted him years ago. He was using fake pay stubs, forged employment verification letters, and creating an entire fictional work history to qualify for loans he had no ability to repay. When the loan companies started comparing notes and conducting thorough background checks as part of their fraud prevention protocols, they quickly discovered the extensive deception. Kevin had been living off fraudulent loan money for months, using the cash to maintain his lifestyle and pay rent while having no legitimate means of repayment. Last I heard from reliable sources, Kevin is facing serious federal charges for loan fraud and identity theft. He could potentially be looking at 3 to 5 years in federal prison, which would destroy any remaining chance he had of rebuilding his life or career. He never did pay back that $18,000 debt to Dad either. Dad took him to civil court and obtained a legal judgment against him. But as the saying goes, you can't squeeze blood from a stone. Kevin is completely broke, unemployed, facing federal criminal charges, and living in a tiny studio apartment that probably costs more than he makes in an entire month. Now let me tell you about Mom's situation because karma decided to deliver something that she never saw coming. About 5 months ago, she was diagnosed with leukemia, advanced stage, aggressive type, the kind where doctors start having conversations about time remaining rather than long-term treatment plans. The woman who spent years systematically poisoning family relationships and destroying trust ended up with her own blood literally betraying her from the inside. Here's the thing about karma, though. When you systematically destroy every meaningful relationship in your life through lies and manipulation, you end up facing the hardest times completely alone. Dad had already moved on with his life and had zero interest in reconciling. My relationship with Mom was permanently destroyed the moment I found those emails detailing her active participation in my betrayal. Kevin, her precious golden child who she had enabled, defended, and prioritized for years, barely visits her now that she's dying. When you're facing potential federal prison time, you apparently don't have much time or energy for dealing with a dying parent who needs care and emotional support. The irony is devastating. The son she sacrificed everything to protect has abandoned her in her hour of greatest need. I heard from a neighbor who still talks to her that Mom has been desperately trying to reach out to both Dad and me, claiming that she wants to make things right before she dies and seek forgiveness for her actions. But some bridges, once you burn them completely with betrayal and lies, simply cannot be rebuilt with deathbed apologies and last-minute regrets. Dad's response when she tried to contact him through intermediaries was brutally simple. She made her choices deliberately and repeatedly. Now she gets to live with the consequences however much time she has left. I haven't responded to any of her numerous attempts to reach out and reconnect. The woman who spent months helping my wife plan my complete destruction doesn't get to play the victim card now that she's facing her own mortality. She doesn't get to demand forgiveness just because she's dying. Well, mostly I haven't responded to her attempts to contact me. There was actually one memorable exception that happened about 9 months ago, and it was the absolute last time I ever saw her face to face. I was at home on a peaceful Sunday morning, enjoying my coffee and reading the news, when someone started pounding aggressively on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw Mom standing there, and she clearly looked like she'd been dragged through hell. She had obviously been drinking heavily despite it being only 9:30 in the morning, and she was swaying unsteadily on her feet. I opened the door, and before I could say a single word, she launched into me with a verbal assault that the whole neighborhood could hear. "You selfish piece of shit!" she screamed loud enough for everyone within 3 blocks to hear clearly. "You destroyed this entire family! You ruined everything! This is all your fault!" "You're drunk," I replied calmly. "Get off my property immediately." "Don't you dare tell me what to do!" she screamed back, pointing an accusatory finger at my face. "This is all your fault. Kevin's in trouble because of you. My marriage is over because of you. I'm alone and dying because of you." "You want to know what really happened, Mom?" I said, my voice getting colder. "You chose your golden child over your actual family. You helped him betray me because you thought he deserved what I had worked for. You picked sides in this conflict, and you picked wrong." "That's not true," she cried, though her voice was cracking. "I was trying to protect everyone. I was trying to keep the family together." "Protect everyone?" I laughed bitterly. "You were protecting Kevin from facing consequences for his actions, like you always did his entire life. How can your heart let you watch me suffer like this?" "Family forgives!" she screamed desperately. "Family helps each other through difficult times. He's your brother." "Family doesn't stab each other in the back, you heartless bitch," I replied with ice in my voice. She was crying now, but still desperately trying to make this somehow my fault, rather than accepting responsibility for her choices. "You know what, Mom? You don't even deserve to be called a mother after what you did. You think you can get my sympathy now after everything you've done to destroy my life? Even if you were dying, I will never forgive you. Do you understand me?" Her face went completely white. Even drunk and unhinged, that statement hit home like a physical blow. "Get off my property right now," I continued. "Don't ever come back here. I don't want to see your face ever again." "Tyler, please," she whispered. I shut the door firmly and locked it behind me. She stood there pounding on the door and crying loudly for another 8 minutes before finally giving up and leaving. I never heard from her again until I got the news about her cancer diagnosis, and even then, it was through third parties rather than direct contact. But the moment that really drove everything home and provided the ultimate closure happened about 2 weeks ago. I was working late at the office, finishing up some complex electrical schematics for a new commercial installation project, when I heard someone knocking persistently on the front door around 8:30 p.m. This was unusual since our office building is typically empty after business hours. I looked outside through the window and saw him, Kevin, sitting in a beat-up Honda that looked like it had seen much better days. When I opened the door, I barely recognized the person standing in front of me. He had lost a significant amount of weight and looked like an absolute ghost of his former self. His clothes were wrinkled and dirty, like he'd been wearing them for days. His eyes were bloodshot and red, like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Tyler," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I need to talk to you, brother. Please give me just a few minutes." "We don't have anything to talk about," I replied flatly, already starting to close the door. "I'm going to prison," he said desperately, his voice barely above a whisper. "I could get 5 years. The lawyers say there's almost no chance of avoiding jail time." He was physically shaking, barely holding himself together emotionally. The confident, arrogant Kevin I had known my entire life was completely gone, replaced by this pathetic, broken shell of a person. "I know I messed up terribly," he continued, tears starting to form in his eyes. "I know I destroyed everything that mattered. But you're my brother, and you're the only person left who can possibly help me through this." "Help you?" I almost laughed out loud at the absurdity. "Why would I ever help you?" "I was stupid, okay?" he said, the words tumbling out desperately. "I was jealous of everything you had. The house, the respect from Dad, the perfect marriage, the successful career. I wanted what you had, and I took it in the worst possible way. I know that now." He started crying like a child, completely breaking down in front of me. "I'm so fucking sorry, Tyler. I'm sorry for everything I did to you and your marriage. I'll do anything to make this right somehow." "There is no making this right," I said with absolute finality. "What you did can never be undone or forgiven. Please, he begged, his voice getting more desperate. Mom's dying alone in that apartment. Dad won't even look at me or acknowledge my existence. You're all I have left in this world. I'll pay you back every penny I owe. I'll work for free. I'll sign over anything I own. Just please don't completely push me away. I stared at him for a long moment, taking in this pathetic shell of the brother I used to know. Part of me, a very small part, almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You didn't just betray me, I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You tried to trick me into raising your child. You were planning to let me believe that baby was mine for the rest of my life. I know it was completely wrong, he sobbed. Everything about what we did was wrong. But we're family, Tyler. Blood is supposed to mean something. No, I stepped closer to him, my voice becoming even quieter and more menacing. We were never really family. Tyler, please, he whispered desperately. You made your choice when you decided to betray me, I said with ice-cold finality. Now live with the consequences of that choice. I started closing the door, then stopped and opened it slightly one more time. And Kevin, I added, looking directly into his eyes, don't ever come here again. We're not brothers anymore. We never really were. I shut the door firmly and locked it. Through the glass window, I watched him stand there for maybe 4 minutes, sobbing uncontrollably like a lost child. Finally, he got back into his beat-up car and drove away into the night. 2 weeks later, he was arrested at his apartment by federal agents. The trial is set for next month, and according to his public defender, he's expected to plead guilty to avoid an even harsher sentence. The most satisfying part of this entire ordeal is that I didn't have to plot elaborate schemes or waste years of my life trying to get back at the people who betrayed me. The truth handled absolutely everything. I just needed to protect myself legally and financially, and then step back and watch karma work its magic. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't revenge. It's simply walking away with your dignity intact and watching the betrayers destroy themselves through their own poor choices and character flaws. These days, I focus entirely on what actually matters in life. The business is absolutely crushing it financially. I've got my house, my investments, my self-respect, and most importantly, my peace of mind. Meanwhile, Mom is dying alone in a crappy apartment, Kevin is headed to federal prison, and Victoria is struggling to survive as a single mother with no support system. If anyone reading this is dealing with a similar situation of family betrayal or infidelity, here's my hard-earned advice. Document absolutely everything you can get your hands on. Protect your assets immediately and comprehensively. And don't waste your time, energy, or emotional well-being trying to save people who are actively working to destroy you. The truth has a way of coming out eventually, and people who choose betrayal over loyalty will ultimately face the consequences of those choices without you having to lift a finger.